The photograph is under 4 inches in width. Its paper has grown brittle, its edges yellowed, and it carries the faint scent of dust and aged timber. Captured in New Orleans, Louisiana, during the spring of 1870. It comes from a period just 5 years after the Civil War ended, an era in American history when freedom remained newly won, delicate, and tenaciously defended. Depicted within it is a black family of 5, posed with an uncommon sense of dignity. The father stands upright on the left, his jaw set with a quiet resoluteness, a hand placed upon the shoulder of his wife, who occupies the center with flawless poise. Behind them stretches a plain studio backdrop. Around them are their 3 children, aged 8, 5, and 3, clad in garments that appear too refined, too intentional, for a family history was expected to overlook. For more than 100 years, the photograph remained in a private collection, uncatalogued and unseen. Then a researcher examined it more closely, and what she discovered in the gaze of the youngest child, a 3-year-old boy seated upon his mother's lap, staring straight into the lens, stopped her entirely. One eye was dark brown, the other pale green. That single biological clue would unravel a mystery extending back 2 centuries, spanning an ocean, and reshaping the narrative of a family history was determined to erase. Before proceeding, do you sense untapped potential within yourself? Then follow the link in the first pinned comment and access ancestral wisdom concerning mind, consciousness, and personal evolution for those pursuing a life of enhanced purpose and clarity. And should this story resonate with you, be sure to subscribe and leave a like. It enables more individuals to encounter narratives such as this one. The call arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 2019, and Dr. Nadia nearly let it go unanswered. She was occupied with grading undergraduate papers at Howard University's Department of Genetics and African Diaspora Studies. An interdisciplinary role many of her peers still found unconventional, though she had long ceased attempting to justify it. For Nadia, genetics and history were not separate domains. They represented the same dialogue, articulated in distinct languages. The caller was a colleague from the Amistad Research Center in New Orleans, Professor Roland Tate, who had devoted the preceding 30 years to cataloging documents concerning Black life in the post-Civil War South. His voice, upon her answering, carried the measured, restrained quality of someone striving not to sound overly excited. "I've come across something," he said, "in a private donation we obtained last year from an estate in Trim. A photograph. I believe you should see it." Nadia traveled to New Orleans 3 days later. The Amistad Research Center occupies several rooms within Tilton Hall at Tulane University. Roland greeted her at the entrance. The photograph already in his possession, enclosed within an acid-free archival sleeve. He handled it with the care one reserves for something whose reality remains uncertain. The image itself was a carte de visite, a small, card-mounted photograph common in the 1860s and 1870s, produced in professional studios and exchanged similarly to calling cards among families who could afford them. That detail alone was noteworthy. Black families in New Orleans in 1870, merely 5 years after emancipation, were not generally the patrons of professional photographers. The family depicted in the image had been arranged with evident care. The father, a broad-shouldered man in a dark wool jacket, stood at the left with a stillness implying he was accustomed to being observed. His wife occupied a high, back chair at the center, wearing a dress with meticulously pleated collar details. 3 children surrounded them, 2 older boys standing behind, and a smaller child, clearly the youngest, positioned on his mother's lap. Nadia studied the photograph silently for an extended period. Then Roland passed her a magnifying loupe. "Examine the youngest one," he instructed quietly. "Look at his eyes. She pressed the loop to the image, leaned closer, and felt the breath leave her lungs. The child's right eye was dark brown. His left eye was pale green. The donation included a handwritten note. He continued, placing a small folded paper on the table beside the archival sleeve. The donating family stated it had been passed down through 4 generations. Based on the paper stock and photographic process, the estimate is 1868 to 1872. New Orleans almost certainly. Nadia returned her gaze to the photograph. The child in the image appeared to be roughly 2 or 3 years old. Seated sideways on his mother's lap with his face turned directly toward the camera. His expression was solemn. Most children of that era appeared so, given the extended exposure times required. Yet his eyes were wide open and distinctly visible, even in the faded print. 2 differing colors, unmistakably. "This is heterochromia iritis," Nadia murmured, more to herself than to Roland. A disparity in iris pigmentation between the 2 eyes. It can arise from several causes. Injury, disease, a developmental anomaly. But in this context, within a black child in 1870, the most probable explanation is a genetic variant. "Is it rare?" Roland inquired. "Complete heterochromia, 2 entirely different eye colors. Occurs in roughly 2 out of every 1,000 individuals," she replied. "But that's across the general population. Among people of West African ancestry, the combination this child seems to possess, dark brown in one eye, green in the other, is dramatically scarcer. It indicates a very specific variant of the OCA2 gene, which regulates melanin production in the iris." She set the loop down with care. The OCA2 variant that generates green pigmentation in one eye, while leaving the other with normal melanin levels, is recorded in scientific literature, but it has only been observed in living populations within one particular geographic area. Roland waited. "The Volta River Basin," she stated, "northern Guyana, a population cluster in the Upper Eastern region that has remained genetically isolated for centuries due to geography. Mountains on 3 sides. Limited interaction with neighboring groups. The variant appears in roughly 1 in 4,000 individuals within that population. Beyond it, it is essentially absent." Roland stared at her. "Are you suggesting that child's eyes can reveal his family's origins?" "I'm suggesting," Nadia replied deliberately, "that if that child's DNA aligns with what I suspect, this photograph has just become the most significant piece of evidence I have ever encountered." The materials accompanying the photograph were sparse. A small bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth, which the estate's executor had included almost as an afterthought. Roland had briefly catalogued them upon arrival, but had not examined them closely until now. Together, he and Nadia spread the contents carefully across the examination table. There was a folded land deed, partially water-damaged, for a property in New Orleans' Treme neighborhood, dated 1871. There was a small prayer card from a Catholic church. Its ink faded to near illegibility, and there was a single handwritten page. Not a letter, but what appeared to be a partial family record. The kind many freed black families in the post war South maintained privately, often in the absence of official documentation that had been deliberately withheld from them. The handwriting was careful and educated. At the top of the page appeared a name Elias. Below it, a woman's name Cora. And beneath those, 3 children listed by name and birth year: James, born 1862, Samuel, born 1865, Thomas, born 1867, Thomas the youngest, born 1867, which would have made him 3 years old at the time of the photograph, if it was taken in 1870. Nadia photographed each document with her phone and then stood quietly regarding the page. "Elias and Cora," she said. "No surnames recorded. Common practice," Roland noted. Many freed families in this period used only first names in private records, especially in Louisiana. Surnames were complicated, Some retained the names of enslavers. Some adopted new ones. Some avoided surnames entirely because of the legal and social complications they entailed. Nadia nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the page. "Thomas," she said softly, the boy with two differently colored eyes, seated on his mother's lap, staring into a camera with the gravity of someone far older. A child born 2 years after a war fought partly so that he could exist freely. She turned back to Roland. "I need to locate living descendants," she stated. "If Thomas survived to adulthood and had children, and if they can be found, a DNA sample could verify everything. That's 150 years of family history to trace," Roland observed. "I know," she replied. "Where do we begin?" Nadia returned to Howard and spent the following 2 weeks immersed in Reconstruction-era records, the 1870 and 1880 United States federal censuses, the Freedmen's Bureau records, church baptismal registers from New Orleans parishes, and the digitized archives of the Louisiana State Archives in Baton Rouge. The challenge was immediately apparent. Elias was one of the most common names given to freed black men in the post-Civil War South. The Freedmen's Bureau records for Louisiana alone listed over 200 men named Elias in New Orleans between 1865 and 1875, without a surname. Narrowing the search was painstaking work. However, the land deed provided an anchor. The Treme property deed from 1871 specified a parcel on St. Claude Avenue. Cross-referencing that address with the 1870 census, she found a household entry: Elias, age 34, laborer; Cora, age 29, James, age 8, Samuel, age 5, Thomas, age 3. Her breath caught. The ages matched perfectly. The 1880 census revealed the same family 10 years older, still on St. Claude Avenue. Thomas was now 13, listed as attending school. His father, Elias, was recorded as a carpenter, an advancement from laborer, suggesting a decade of careful, deliberate progress. Then the trail went silent. The 1890 census, which would have shown Thomas as a young adult, had been almost entirely destroyed in a 1921 fire at the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C. It was one of the greatest losses in American genealogical history, and it consumed thousands of black family histories whole. The 1900 census showed a Thomas listed in New Orleans, the right age, working as a dock worker, married to a woman named Iris, with 2 children. But Nadia couldn't confirm it was the same man. She called Roland. "I may have him through 1900, she said, "but I need to connect him to living descendants. I'll require genealogical assistance, someone specializing in black Southern families." Roland didn't hesitate. "Contact Josephine Marks," he said. "She's in Atlanta. She's been tracing black Louisiana families for 30 years. If Thomas has living descendants, she'll locate them." Nadia wrote down the name. Outside her office window, the Washington sky was the flat gray of early spring. She looked at the photograph again, at Thomas, at his 2 mismatched eyes, and felt the full weight of what she was attempting to accomplish settle upon her shoulders. "I'm coming," she thought. "Just hold on." Josephine Marks answered the phone on the second ring. Within 60 seconds, Nadia understood why Roland had recommended her without reservation. She was 71, had retired from the Atlanta public school system 20 years ago, and had spent every year since building one of the most extensive private databases of black Southern genealogy in the United States. She maintained the records in a converted bedroom of her house in Decatur. Floor to ceiling shelves of binders, 3 computer monitors running simultaneously, and a wall-mounted map of Louisiana covered in colored pins. Thomas, born 1867, New Orleans. Father named Elias, mother named Cora. St. Claude Avenue in Treme. Josephine repeated back, her voice brisk and precise. "Give me a week." She called back in 4 days. "I found him," she said. And Nadia could detect the satisfaction in her voice. The particular pleasure of a woman who had devoted decades to this work and still felt it every time. Thomas lived until 1931. He and his wife Iris had 4 children. 3 survived to adulthood. One of his granddaughters, named Della, moved to Chicago in 1943 during the Great Migration. Della had 2 sons. One of them, a man named Curtis, is still alive. He's 83 and lives in Evanston, a Chicago suburb. Nadia sat very still. "Does he know about the photograph?" she asked. "He doesn't know it exists," Josephine said. "But I found a phone number for his daughter. Her name is Patricia. She's in her 50s, lives in the same area. She's the one to call first." Nadia thanked Josephine quietly and sat for a long moment after hanging up. A living descendant. A direct line from the 3-year-old boy in the photograph. The boy with 1 brown eye and 1 green eye seated on his mother's lap in a New Orleans studio in 1870. To a woman named Patricia living in Evanston, Illinois in 2019, 149 years. The distance between then and now felt, in that moment, remarkably small. She picked up the phone again and dialed. It rang 3 times. Then a woman's voice, warm and slightly cautious. "Hello. My name is Dr. Nadia Osei," she said carefully. "I'm a geneticist at Howard University, and I believe I've found something that belongs to your family." Patricia drove to Evanston from her apartment in Rogers Park and met Nadia at a coffee shop 2 weeks later. Nadia had flown in from Washington specifically for the conversation. Patricia was 54, a high school history teacher with clothes, cropped natural hair, and a careful, observant quality. Someone who had learned to assess situations before committing to them. She sat across from Nadia with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee and listened without interruption as Nadia explained everything: the photograph, the archival donation, the heterochromia, the OCA2 variant, the census trail that had led from Thomas to Della to Curtis to her. When Nadia finished, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "My grandfather, Curtis, used to talk about his grandmother, Della," she said finally. "She came up from New Orleans as a young woman. He said she always kept a photograph of something very old, something she called the family picture, but it had been lost somewhere in the move north. He searched for it for years." She paused. "He stopped mentioning it when I was a teenager. I think he concluded it was simply gone." Nadia reached into her bag and placed a high-resolution print of the photograph on the table between them. Patricia looked at it for a very long time without speaking. Her gaze moved slowly across the image. The father standing at the left, the mother seated at the center, the 2 older boys behind, and then finally the youngest child, the boy on his mother's lap. Her hand moved to her mouth. "The eyes," she said quietly. "Yes," Nadia said. Patricia looked up. Her own eyes, Nadia noticed for the first time, were dark brown, both of them. But around her left iris, barely visible, there was a faint, irregular ring of green pigmentation. Not full heterochromia, but a trace, a residue. The gene had not vanished. It had simply quieted, passed down through generations in a diluted form, awaiting recognition. "What does this mean?" Patricia asked. "Scientifically, I mean, what are you actually seeking?" "I need a DNA sample from you, and ideally from your father, Curtis," Nadia said. "If the OCA2 variant is present in your family's genome, in the configuration I believe it is, I can tell you precisely where in West Africa your family's line originates." Patricia set down her coffee. "How exactly?" she asked. "To the region," Nadia said. "Possibly to the ethnic group. Maybe closer." The samples arrived at the Howard University Genetics lab on a Thursday morning, buccal swabs from both Patricia and her father Curtis, who had agreed to participate following a lengthy phone call with Nadia, during which she had said little, but listened to everything. Curtis was 83 and had grown up hearing fragments of a story he could never fully assemble. His grandmother Della, who had partially raised him in Chicago after his own mother died young, had spoken of New Orleans with a particular mixture of pride and grief. She had told him once that their family had originated from far away, further than anyone knew. He had taken it as old woman's poetry. Now he wasn't certain. Nadia and her graduate assistant, a young man named Divan who specialized in population genomics, conducted the full analysis over the following 10 days. The results were unambiguous. The OCA2 variant present in both Patricia and Curtis, present but partially suppressed across generations of genetic blending, was a specific single nucleotide polymorphism designated RS1800R4, associated but occurring in conjunction with two additional rare variants on the same gene locus that together produced the distinctive iris pigmentation pattern visible in the 1870 photograph. This three-variant combination had been documented in scientific literature only once before, in a 2014 population genetics study of communities in the Upper East region of Ghana, near the town of Baku, in a cluster of villages along the Gambaga Escarpment. The study had identified the combination in approximately 1 in 4,000 individuals within that specific population, and had noted its near complete absence in all other populations surveyed worldwide. Devon looked up from the screen when the analysis finished. "That's remarkable," he said quietly. Nadia was already on the phone with a colleague, Dr. Kwame Asante, at the University of Ghana's genetics department, someone she had collaborated with twice before and trusted completely. "Kwame," she said when he answered, "I need to know if there are living family clusters in the Baku area carrying the RS1800-407 combination with the two flanking variants I'm going to send you. I believe I've found a diaspora connection that extends back to the slave trade era." There was a pause on the other end. "Send me the data," Kwame said. "And Nadia, if this is what you think it is, you need to prepare yourself for what follows." She looked at the photograph pinned above her desk. Thomas's two mismatched eyes stared back at her across 150 years.
"I know,"
she said.
"Send me what you find."
Dr. Kwame Asante worked expeditiously. He cross-referenced the variant data Nadia sent him against his department's existing genomic database, one of the most comprehensive in West Africa, built over 15 years of fieldwork across 12 countries. Within a week, he had a preliminary answer. The three-variant OCA2 combination existed in his database in samples from 11 individuals, all from the same geographic cluster, 4 villages in the Baku municipal district of the Upper East region of Ghana, situated along the rocky lower slope of the Gambaga Escarpment. The villages were small. The largest had fewer than 800 residents, and had maintained a strong degree of genetic isolation due to both geography and cultural practice. They belonged to the Kusasi ethnic group, an agricultural people who had inhabited the region for centuries. But what Kwame found next prompted him to call Nadia immediately rather than waiting for a written report. In the oral history records maintained by the University of Ghana's Institute of African Studies, there was a documented account collected in 1987 from an elder in one of the 4 villages, describing the forced removal of a large number of people from the area during the late 18th century. The account specified a particular event, a raid by slave traders operating through the Ashanti middleman network, targeting the Kusasi settlements along the escarpment during a period of regional instability around 1790 to 1810. The elder had named families, named clans, and had described with the precision of oral tradition preserved across generations a man taken in one of the raids. A man known in the village as someone with one eye dark as earth, one eye light as river water. Nadia felt the room shift around her when Kwame read that line aloud over the phone. "It's him," she said, barely a whisper. "Or his father." Or his grandfather. Someone in that line. The genetic and historical evidence together are very strong, Quaim said carefully. We cannot be 100% certain without direct genealogical documentation from the Ghanaian side, but the convergence, the variant, the geographic specificity, the oral history, the physical description. It is, by any reasonable scientific standard, compelling. I need to go there, Nadia said. I thought you would say that, Quaim replied. I'll arrange it. Nadia landed in Accra on a humid Tuesday evening and drove north the following morning with Quaim, a translator named Abina, and a University of Ghana doctoral student named Fifi, who had grown up in the Upper East region and knew the area well. The journey from Accra to Baku took nearly 12 hours. North through the Ashanti region, past Kumasi, into the flat savanna of the north, where the landscape opened up and the sky became vast. They arrived after dark and slept in a guest house in Baku town. The following morning, Fifi drove them the final 20 kilometers to the villages along the escarpment. The village elder who received them was a man in his late 70s, named Adongo. He had been briefed by the local district cultural officer about the nature of the visit, and he sat with them under a large neem tree at the edge of the compound with the composed, unhurried manner of someone who understood that certain conversations require the full weight of patience. Nadia showed him the photograph on her laptop screen, the 1870 photograph. The family of 5 posed in a New Orleans studio dressed in their best clothes, staring into a camera. Adongo looked at the image for a long time. He did not speak immediately. Around them, the sounds of the village, children, chickens, the distant rhythm of someone working, continued without pause. Then he leaned forward and pointed to Thomas, the youngest child on his mother's lap. He said something in Kusol that Abena translated quietly, the eyes of the Ada line. Nadia looked at Quaim. He recognizes the trait, Quaim murmured. It's known in the village, associated with a specific family lineage. Adongo spoke again at length, and Abena translated in sections carefully. The Ada family had been among those taken in the late 18th century raids. The oral history recorded their names. The trait, one dark eye, one light, had appeared in that line for as far back as anyone could remember, and it had not been seen in the village since the raids. It was considered a mark of the family, something that had departed with them and never returned. Until now. Nadia turned the laptop toward Adongo and let him look at the photograph again. Tell him, she said to Abena, her voice steady despite everything she was feeling, that they survived. Tell him the family survived. The video call required 3 months to arrange. There were logistics, time zones, technology access, translation, the careful emotional preparation of everyone involved. And Nadia moved through all of it with the methodical patience the work demanded. But beneath the logistics, she felt the weight of what was about to happen with a clarity she had rarely experienced in 20 years of scientific work. On a Sunday morning in November 2019, Curtis sat in his living room in Evanston with Patricia beside him, a laptop open on the coffee table. On the screen, connected from a community center in Baku, sat 3 members of the Ada family, a man named Erasmus, his sister Agnes, and an elder woman, their grandmother, who had lived her whole life on the escarpment and had heard the story of the taken ones since childhood. Nadia served as the bridge, with Abena translating from Kuzol and Patricia, translating family history from the American side. It was not a dramatic meeting in the cinematic sense. There were no shouts, no immediate tears, no single overwhelming moment. It was quieter than that, and more profound. Curtis, who had said little through the entire process, leaned forward when the elder woman on the screen began to speak. Abena translated her words slowly. She was recounting the names from the oral history, the names of those taken, and among them, a name, a man's name, the one associated with the eyes that had been preserved in the village memory for over 200 years. Curtis listened to the name. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very softly, "My grandmother, Della, used to say that name. I thought it was just something old she remembered. I didn't know it meant anything. It had meant everything. It had traveled from a village on a West African escarpment across the Atlantic Ocean, through the horror of the Middle Passage, through slavery, through emancipation, through the Great Migration, through a century and a half of silence, carried in the DNA of a child who sat on his mother's lap in a New Orleans photography studio in 1870 and looked directly into a camera with one dark eye and one pale green eye, as if he knew somehow that someone would eventually look back. The photograph had never been merely a photograph. It had been a message, inscribed in the oldest language there is, the language of blood, of inheritance, of a family that refused, across every possible obstacle, to be erased. And now, at last, it had been read. As a final note, you don't require more motivation. You need a system that compels you to act immediately. If you wish to cultivate discipline, overcome procrastination, and forge an unshakable mindset, click the link in the description to discover how to convert knowledge into daily practice.